The night I found out I was pregnant, I sat alone in our bathroom for 45 minutes staring at two pink lines, and the only thing I could think was, he's going to use this against me. I pushed that thought away immediately. I told myself I was being paranoid. My husband was a good man. His family loved me. I was 32 years old. I had a stable career as a licensed CPA at a mid-size accounting firm in Charlotte, and I was finally going to be a mother after 2 years of trying and one heartbreaking miscarriage the previous spring. This was supposed to be the moment I'd been waiting for. I should have listened to that first instinct. My husband, I'll call him by what he was, not his name. My husband came from money in the way that people from old money do, which is quietly and with a lot of conditions attached. His father had built a regional commercial real estate company over 40 years, the kind of company where the family name was on the building and the family's fingerprints were on every deal. When my father-in-law passed away 18 months before I found out I was pregnant, he left the controlling interest of the company, valued at just over $60 million, in a trust. The terms of that trust were specific. My husband, as the eldest son, would inherit the majority stake, but only if he produced a biological heir before his 38th birthday. He turned 37 the month I got that positive test. I knew about the trust. He'd told me about it when we were dating, almost like a footnote, something he mentioned and then moved past quickly. I didn't think much of it at the time. We were in love, we wanted children anyway. It seemed like a detail, not a design. I understand now that for him it was always the design. We told his family at dinner 3 weeks after I found out. His mother cried. His younger brother, my brother-in-law, the one who stood to inherit a secondary stake if my husband failed to meet the trust conditions, hugged me and said he was so happy for us. His wife, my sister-in-law, squeezed my hand and said I was glowing. Everyone was so warm, so genuinely delighted. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what family feels like. My obgyn confirmed twins at the 8-week ultrasound. 2 heartbeats side by side on the screen, and I started crying before the technician even finished pointing them out. My husband held my hand. He seemed genuinely moved. I believed that part was real, at least. I still believe that part was real. What happened next happened slowly, the way bad things in close relationships usually do. Not all at once, but in small shifts you explain away one at a time until you've explained away so many of them that you're standing in the middle of something terrible and wondering how you got there. It started with the doctor. My husband suggested, around 12 weeks, that we switch from my regular obgyn, a woman I'd been seeing for 6 years who had been with me through the miscarriage, who knew my history, to a specialist. He said it was because of the twins. High-risk pregnancy, he said. He'd done research. He'd found someone highly recommended. His name was Dr. Whitmore and his office was across town, and something about the waiting room felt sterile in a way that made me uneasy, though I couldn't have said why at the time. I asked my husband why he'd chosen this doctor specifically. He said a colleague had recommended him. I asked which colleague. He said it didn't matter. The guy was supposed to be the best in the area for multiples. I switched doctors. I told myself it was fine. The pregnancy was progressing well. I had enough to manage. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that Dr. Whitmore had gone to college with my brother-in-law. They'd been in the same fraternity. They still met for golf every few weeks at a club in Ballantyne. I'm a forensic accountant by training. I worked financial fraud cases for 3 years before moving to the private sector. I know how to read a trail. I know what coordination looks like when it's trying to look like coincidence. I just wasn't looking yet. The moment I started looking was a Tuesday night in my 20th week. My husband thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I'd been having trouble sleeping for weeks. The twins were active at night, and I'd gotten into the habit of lying still and letting him think I was out because it was the only time he left me alone. He'd become strange about the pregnancy in ways I couldn't articulate, attentive in ways that felt like surveillance, always wanting to know how I felt, what I'd eaten, whether I'd called the doctor. At the time, I told myself he was anxious. First-time father, high-stakes trust, a lot riding on a healthy delivery. That Tuesday night, I heard him on the phone in his office down the hall. Our house was old, with thin walls and a heating system that carried sound in ways he'd never accounted for. I could hear his voice clearly, though not quite every word. I heard enough. He said, "She doesn't know anything. We just need to get through the delivery. And then, Whitmore knows what to do. It's already arranged. And then, quieter but unmistakable, she'll think she lost one. It happens with twins. Nobody questions it." I lay in that bed for what felt like a very long time. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I listened to him wrap up the call and walk back to our room and get into bed beside me, and I lay there in the dark, next to my husband, and I understood for the first time exactly what I was dealing with. They were going to tell me one of my babies died at birth. They were going to give that baby to someone else. I spent the rest of that night thinking very carefully. I did not cry. I did not panic. I had learned through years of working fraud cases that the moment you let someone know you've figured out their scheme is the moment they start destroying evidence and changing plans. I had to be methodical. I had to be invisible. I had to keep acting like a woman who didn't know anything, while simultaneously building a case that would dismantle everything they had constructed. The next morning, I made my husband coffee and asked him how he'd slept. "Great," he said. "You?" "Really well," I said. That was the last honest conversation we had. The first thing I needed to do was find an ally I could trust absolutely. Not a family member. His family was compromised, and my own family was 3 states away in Ohio, which I had always thought of as an inconvenience and now understood was something my husband had factored into our life in Charlotte deliberately. We'd moved here for his work, into a neighborhood where his mother lived 12 minutes away, and my closest friend from college was a 6-hour drive. The isolation hadn't seemed intentional when we were building it. It always doesn't. I called my college roommate Becca on a Wednesday afternoon from the parking lot of a Whole Foods while my husband thought I was grocery shopping. I told her everything. She went quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Tell me what you need me to do." Becca was in healthcare administration in Columbus. She didn't have legal training, but she was smart and she was furious on my behalf, and she wasn't connected to anyone in my husband's network. I needed someone on the outside who could be a repository for what I was finding, someone who could hold information somewhere he couldn't touch it. I also needed a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer yet, a criminal attorney who understood fraud. I found one through a bar association referral, a woman named, I'll call her my attorney, who specialized in financial crimes and family law intersections. I called her from my office during lunch using my work phone. My husband didn't have access to my work accounts. I had always kept my professional life separate from our marriage, and he had always seemed a little irritated by that. I understood now why. My attorney told me that what I'd overheard, while alarming, would need corroboration to go anywhere legally. I needed documentation. I needed to connect Dr. Whitmore to my brother-in-law in a way that was provable, not just a matter of their shared history. I needed to find out if money had changed hands, and if so, through what accounts. That was where my training came in. My brother-in-law ran a small property management company, not connected to the family trust, just his own side business. I had helped him set up his QuickBooks the year before as a favor. I still had his login credentials in a notes file on my personal laptop. He had never asked me to remove them. He had probably forgotten he'd ever given them to me. I want to be clear. I understand there are legal complexities around accessing someone's financial records, even with credentials they provided. I discussed this with my attorney before I did anything. She advised me on what I could and couldn't do. I followed her guidance carefully. What I found in those accounts, accessed legitimately and documented with my attorney's knowledge, was a payment. $40,000, wire transferred 5 weeks earlier to an LLC I didn't recognize. The LLC name was a string of letters that meant nothing, the kind of name designed to mean nothing. I am very good at finding the humans behind entity structures. It's essentially what I did for 3 years professionally. Within a week, through public business registration records, I had traced that LLC to a registered agent in South Carolina, and from there, through several more steps that I'll spare you, to a numbered account associated with a name I did recognize. Dr. Whitmore's wife. I documented everything. I sent copies to Becca in Columbus. I sent copies to my attorney. I saved copies on a personal cloud account my husband had no access to and didn't know existed. I was 23 weeks pregnant and conducting a financial investigation in my free time while pretending, every single day, to be a woman who was happily preparing her nursery and talking about paint colors and arguing mildly with her mother-in-law about whether to find out the genders ahead of time. We found out the genders, a boy and a girl. My mother-in-law was thrilled. I kept thinking about that. About how she sat across from me at the gender reveal my sister-in-law threw, pressing her hands together and saying she'd always wanted a granddaughter. And I didn't know if she was in on it. I still don't know. The not knowing about her is the part that still keeps me up some nights. Around week 28, something shifted in how my husband treated me. He became more careful, more deliberate. He started coming to every prenatal appointment, which he hadn't been doing consistently before. He would hold my hand through the whole thing and ask Dr. Whitmore questions in a way that sounded concerned and attentive, and was actually, I understood now, a way of signaling and confirming. I would sit on the exam table and watch them interact and maintain my expression of a tired, grateful, oblivious pregnant woman, and inside I was cataloging every glance. At week 30, I contacted the FBI field office in Charlotte. I want to be honest about that part. I was terrified. Not of my husband specifically. He had never been violent, and I didn't believe he would hurt me. I was terrified of what would happen if I moved too early, before the case was solid. Financial fraud involving a trust of this magnitude, conspiracy involving a licensed physician, potential child trafficking charges, those were serious federal territory. If I came forward before I had enough, they could clean it up and I'd lose everything, including my children. My attorney had a contact at the FBI. She made the introduction. I met with 2 agents at my attorney's office on a Thursday afternoon and I brought a binder. I am a forensic accountant. When I bring a binder, it is thorough. The agents were quiet for a long time after I finished walking them through what I'd found. One of them asked me how I was holding up. The other asked if I had somewhere safe to stay. I said I was fine where I was, as long as they moved within the next 6 weeks, before my due date. They said they would. The following 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I went to baby showers. I assembled furniture. I had dinner with my mother-in-law twice. My husband rubbed my back and asked about my swollen ankles, and I let him, because I needed him to believe nothing had changed. Becca drove down from Columbus on a pretext and stayed for a long weekend, and having her in the house, someone who knew the truth, someone on my side, was the only thing that felt real during that entire period. The week before my scheduled C-section, I called my mother in Ohio and told her she needed to come to Charlotte. I told her the pregnancy had gotten more complicated and I wanted her there. I didn't tell her why. I didn't want to frighten her before it was resolved, and I didn't want to risk the information traveling somewhere it shouldn't. She booked a flight that night. She arrived on a Sunday. My husband picked her up from the airport. He was charming and attentive to her, the way he always was, and she texted me from the car. "He's so sweet. You're so lucky." I read that text and I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and I stood very still for a minute. Then I went back to cooking dinner. My C-section was scheduled for a Thursday. On Wednesday evening, Becca called me while I was in the bathtub. We had a code, a specific ringtone pattern, for when she needed to reach me without my husband knowing the content, and told me she'd heard from my attorney, who had heard from the federal agents. They were moving the next morning. Before I went in for surgery, they would be at Dr. Whitmore's office and at my brother-in-law's address simultaneously. My husband would be taken into custody when he arrived at the hospital. I stayed in the bathtub for a long time after that call. I thought about the night I'd lain next to him and heard the shape of the whole plan in one phone conversation. I thought about every appointment, every dinner, every back rub, every concerned question about my ankles. I thought about the baby girl and the baby boy who had spent 38 weeks growing inside me, not knowing anything about the world they were arriving into, and how hard I had worked to make sure that world was going to be safe. The next morning, I put on the outfit I'd laid out the night before, comfortable, easy to remove, and I woke my husband and my mother, and we drove to the hospital together. My husband was arrested in the lobby. My mother grabbed my arm. I had prepared a brief version of what to tell her, and I delivered it as steadily as I could while a nurse guided us both toward the maternity floor. She kept saying my name. She kept saying, "Oh, sweetheart." I held on to her hand and kept walking. The surgery was performed by a physician my attorney had helped me arrange, not Dr. Whitmore, who by that point was being interviewed by federal agents in his office across town. A board-certified maternal-fetal medicine specialist from another hospital system, who had been briefed on the situation and had agreed quietly to step in. My daughter was born at 9:47 in the morning. My son was born 2 minutes later. They were both healthy. They were both exactly where they were supposed to be. My mother held them both before I was out of recovery. I know because she sent me a photo, the two of them wrapped in hospital blankets in her arms, and her face in that photo is the most purely happy face I have ever seen. I look at that photo when I need to remember what the whole thing was for. My brother-in-law was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and violations under federal child trafficking statutes. Dr. Whitmore surrendered his medical license and was charged with conspiracy and fraud. My husband was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. The trust, the $60 million estate my father-in-law had spent 40 years building and tied to a condition that turned his eldest son into someone capable of all of this, was frozen pending litigation. My sister-in-law cooperated with federal investigators. She claimed she hadn't known the full scope of the plan. I don't know what I believe about that. What I know is that she is not facing criminal charges, and that she has not contacted me since the arrests, and that I do not expect her to. My mother-in-law called me 3 weeks after everything became public. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she'd had no idea. She said she was so sorry. She asked if she could see the babies someday. I told her I would think about it. I am still thinking about it. My divorce was finalized 7 months later. As the non-offending spouse of a man whose criminal conduct had directly endangered me and our children, my attorney was able to secure a settlement that left me with the house, full legal and physical custody, and a financial arrangement that ensured my kids and I would be stable. My husband took a plea. He is currently serving 8 years in a federal facility in North Carolina. I went back to work part-time when the twins were 4 months old, from home initially, then back in the office 3 days a week once I'd found a nanny I trusted completely. My firm was, overall, extraordinarily decent about all of it. My managing partner sent flowers to the hospital and never once treated me differently when I came back. I don't take that for granted. Becca was in Charlotte for the first 2 weeks after I came home from the hospital. She slept on the pullout in the nursery and handled the 3 a.m. feeding shifts so I could sleep and recover. There aren't words for what that meant. My mom stayed for 6 weeks. She learned to swaddle faster than I did. She made a massive pot of soup every Sunday that lasted us through the week. She did not once say "I told you so," although she had told me so. Gently, 2 years into my marriage, she had said something careful and precise about whether I was happy, and I had deflected and she had let me, because she was that kind of mother. I think about the version of myself who lay in that bed at 20 weeks, listening through thin walls and chose not to panic. I am proud of her. She was terrified and she was methodical and she protected her children before they were even born. My daughter's name is June. My son's name is Ellis. They are 14 months old now, and June has just figured out how to climb out of her crib. And Ellis has strong opinions about which songs he wants played at bedtime, and they are the most real things I have ever been responsible for. I have not regretted a single step I took to bring them home safely, not one.